Welcome to the Xander Zone.
This is just a quick video on my thoughts on RE8 and how Capcom may be ruining the timeline of Resident Evil. This will be the beginning of a series I call History of Evil, where I will deep dive every character in the RE universe from beginning to end. Some will naturally need a follow-up video from time to time though, because they are still alive in the video games. I will also be making two other series entitled Umbrella Declassified Files and Cancelled Creature Files, both focusing on the monsters within the franchise. I will also include an opening theme for each segment with music, and use some of my old articles from my days at the Residence of Evil as the record keeper. The History of Evil segment will focus on my writings there called Resident Evil Dossiers. But for now, as I said, I just want to make this a quick video about Lord Oswell E. Spencer. It won't cover his whole life. It will just focus on how RE8 may be destroying the history of the games we have grown up with. Let's dig in. Let's talk about the timeline. I've been dying to talk to you about the timeline. Before RE8, I went back to the Capcom website to look at the timeline for some research on an article I was writing, and what did I find? I found this. It no longer exists! They have removed the timeline, and it says coming soon. This leads me to think the worst case scenario is happening. They are about to change the established timeline to some capacity. At first, I was excited to learn the timeline had been removed, because I thought this would mean they would be fixing some of the incorrect and contradictory facts listed there, which I found during my extensive research. Now, I think it's because they are changing the timeline altogether. I didn't pick up on this at first. I was just playing the game without really digging too deep into the lore presented in this new entry. After a conversation with Rian, my lead actress in my Resident Evil show Tales of the Dead, I began to finally pull that thread, and I realized just how much the files Chris finds impacts the timeline. I will explain exactly how, but to discuss Spencer we must discuss what drove him to open the Umbrella Corporation in the first place. In the late 1800s, while Travis Trading Enterprises was in Africa, they discovered something that would change Oswell Spencer's life forever. During this time, this European company held very little importance, except as a trading company with Asia. Over time, their goals would change, and they would set into motion events that are still unfolding today, leading them to eventually become Tricell, but that's a story for another day. For now, let's focus on Travis Trading Enterprises. The youngest of 7 brothers, Henry Travis led an expedition to Africa, and during this time he discovered so much he filled 72 encyclopedias entitled Natural History Conspectus. This book covered the African tribes he found, its history, everything including the local insects, animals, and fauna. Much to his dismay, his book was seen as a fantastical farce and was determined as too elaborate to be anything but fiction. As a result, the encyclopedia was only printed in limited numbers, making it somewhat of a collector's item for dilettantes and connoisseurs. It was deemed fictitious because of Sun and Trepa, or the Stairway to the Sun flower he found, which he said could bestow powers to those who consumed it. Years later, a young Oswell Spencer reads the book for the first time and becomes obsessed with it. This may have been what led him to major in medical research at an esteemed university. In any case, it was here he met his 2 best friends, James Marcus and Lord Edward Ashford. The 3 became inseparable. I've read conflicting reports in my extensive research. One website places him reading the Natural History Conspectus in 1966, after opening Umbrella, although most other places have stated he read the Natural History Conspectus and became obsessed with its talk of a flower granting powers years prior. This included the timeline on Capcom's website if I remember correctly. I think it placed him reading it in the 30s, so as a young boy or teenager. This would mean the latter is actually the one that's correct, and he read it when he was young. I once read that Oswell spoke of its great power for so long, He drove his two friends nuts with his constant rambling about the flower. Finally, they convinced him after years of him talking about it to go look for it, and if they found it, great, but if not, he would finally stop talking about it once and for all, and look for an alternative method to carry out Oswell and Edward's vision of a superior race. As far as James Marcus, he didn't care too much for the idea of eugenics. He was just in it for the science aspect more than anything. This probably places it in 1959 or 1960 when they finally went to Africa. The expedition was funded by Edward Ashford, who they would send messages back to in England, and he'd make whatever they needed a reality. 2 long years of searching, and they finally found the flower, much to Oswell's excitement. They acquired what they could from their samples and learned of the progenitor virus that was laying dormant inside. It was upon this discovery they decided to create a pharmaceutical company named Umbrella back in 1962 to both hide and fund their research into the virus. Basically, hiding in the open, so no one would suspect a company that did so much for the world could ever be doing something so insidious. They found an out-of-the-way location in the United States Midwest, deep in the Arklay Mountains, outside of Raccoon City, to erect Spencer's new mansion estate. This city became the home of Umbrella, and it was here, in the forest, the first Umbrella lab was created, completely hidden underneath Spencer's mansion. Umbrella, of course, spread like a cancer, with countless labs throughout the world, but this was the first. I'm glossing over a lot, and we'll cover this fully in the future. My point in this video is just to show that Resident Evil Village is quite possibly destroying the timeline, because the files Chris found said this. Dear Miranda, my deepest apologies for not meeting you in person. I would love nothing more than to visit your quaint village once more. However, I am incredibly busy. Then again, I suppose for an immortal woman such as yourself, you no longer remember this poor, half-dead medical student in the snow. I have always cherished the revelations I came to 15 years ago when I stayed in your village. I was inspired by your research to think one could transform a human being by infecting them with an organism. Positively visionary. I knew that with that knowledge, I could achieve my own vision for the next step in human evolution. Even after 2 world wars, and humanity on the cusp of another, my conviction never wavered. I realized, however, through the many nights of intellectual talks you and I shared, that your conviction differed from mine. You hoped to bring back a single dead person, while I aimed to change the world. Your experiments on the mold would not have aided me in my endeavor to achieve an exponential infection. I thought a virus would be more effective. This is why, my dear, I had to leave you. I still regret never telling you goodbye. My apologies for reminiscing. I actually have news that I thought might please you. I have found the key to evolution, the progenitor, a virus found in Africa. I plan to start a company with friends and colleagues dedicated to the virus research. I will call it Umbrella, just like the symbol in the cave that we spoke about. I am one step closer to making my vision a reality. I hope you will be able to achieve your goal someday too. You taught me so much, and for that I will be forever in your debt. Sincerely, your lifelong student, Oswell E. Spencer. Quick note before moving on. I noticed while editing this video, they even misspelled Oswell's name. It's spelled O-S-W-E-L-L, not O-Z-W-E-L-L. That's like them misspelling the plural for the name Winters. It's not Winterses. Did they even proofread this shit? Jesus Christ. Where's the Tylenol? This damn game's gonna give me a freaking tumor.
There it is. Oh, we now return you to your regularly scheduled nightmare.
Now in RE8, it is mentioned he was on a solo hiking trip in Eastern Europe. There, he became lost in a snowstorm and collapsed. He was found and saved by Miranda. It was here he learned a person could become immortal. If the game said after meeting Miranda he learned it truly is possible to become immortal and evolve to a higher being, then I'd be mildly praising it. But I'd still be annoyed this was never mentioned before. But alas, it doesn't say that. It implies he got the idea of creating a new race by implementing something into the system from his time with Miranda, completely retconning him reading the Natural History Conspectus and becoming obsessed with Sun and Trepa. This would somewhat change things to him either reading about the flower after creating Umbrella, or accidentally finding it while searching for a suitable virus, none of which is ever mentioned previously in RE's history. I know the letter states this took place while he was still a medical student, but with it never being mentioned in 25 years worth of files and diaries, I have a hard time believing this event happened at all. Considering this event would be so influential in Oswell's life, one could argue he was protecting her, even though I don't see that with him murdering his best friends later. It was apparent he was a calculating psychopath. I just don't see him truly having feelings for someone. But for argument's sake, let's say he did, and he was in fact protecting her from being discovered by the rest of the world. With all the other personal things that end up in the journals and files in the past, if this important event actually happened, Spencer should have vaguely mentioned her without name, without location. He could have even wrote he wanted to achieve what she did, or he knows it's possible, despite not achieving all he set out to do.
Ironic, isn't it? For one who has the right to be a god, to face his own mortality.
And yes, he always had eugenics ideals, and rumor has it, despite being from England, it is believed his family was in fact part of the Nazi Party, but that's never been confirmed. Yes, that's right.
Nazis. I hate these guys.
Makes a lot of sense when you think about it. Him trying to create a race of superior beings, but only those who were of noble blood and was worthy of such a gift. Him being a racist bastard isn't much of a stretch. Fact is, he already knew how to do this, or at least believed he did long before Umbrella, with the Stairway to the Sunflower, which as stated is where he found the progenitor virus that led to the T-virus, all the different T-virus strains, and later the G-virus. What's even more insulting to me is if you look, unlike most files in RE, the letter isn't even dated, it just vaguely says 15 years ago. I feel this is because they weren't confident in where to put this, and knew it doesn't really fit. So they just info-dumped a major plot hole into the franchise. Thank you for creating it, I had a lot of fun with it, but even though the story still isn't the holy trilogy of evil, I did enjoy the game. But yeah, you for forcing this plot hole into the game. As far as I'm concerned, Chris didn't find the letter. It didn't happen. Nope, I don't accept it because my brain freaks out too much at the notion. The creator of Village is an Uber fan, that's apparent in the finished product, but him shoehorning in a character that didn't need to be referenced in 8 is insulting to all of us longtime fans who have studied the established lore and history of the franchise. Plus, it's very concerning to me that if they are in fact changing the established timeline on the website, then that means nothing that we know to be true is safe, and they might retcon everything. If they try to do that, I'm going to be very upset. They might as well just reboot the franchise instead of trying to change its history in sequels. Case in point, recently, the writer of Falcon and the Winter Soldier was complaining about not getting to use any character in the Marvel Cinematic Universe he wanted. No spoilers, I promise. This won't spoil it at all if you haven't seen it. The character he wanted to use was Spider-Man, and he complained he believed he could use him when signing on. Kevin Feige, executive producer, and basically the showrunner of the MCU, flat out said no, that character has absolutely no place in this story. He said he wants every writer to justify why they want to use a character in the show or movie, and if it doesn't logically work, then they don't need to use the character. The writer might have snuck in a reference to a Spidey villain if you look closely, but that reference felt organic, as opposed to a story about Sam and Bucky, also featuring the web slinger. I truly love the idea of not using a character unless it fits. I wish Capcom had this restraint when making this new entry of Resident Evil, because frankly, Spencer and Umbrella didn't need referenced. I don't even understand the Umbrella symbols to begin with in the Giant's chalice, when he didn't even stay there. He didn't open a lab there. He basically stopped in, maybe got freaky with Miranda, according to the letter and its undertones, but nothing more. And I did see the letter says he saw the symbol there in a cave, and modeled the company after it. But it just seems so freaking forced and far-fetched for me. So yeah, to me, this is all utter bullshit. What do you think about this? How does all this make you feel? Are you also as afraid as I am of this affecting the franchise's history? Let's discuss this together. Tell me your thoughts and feelings in the comments section below. Be sure to subscribe to the Xander Zone for more Resident Evil content, including my radio stories, Tales of the Dead, and expected this year, I will be turning the unfilmed George A. Romero Resident Evil script into a radio story as well. All radio stories feature actors, creature sounds, effect sounds, and music to enhance the viewer's experience. The evil goodies don't stop there. My in-depth analysis on the creatures and characters will also return in the future. But wait, there's more! Me and my team will also bring you content outside of Resident Evil, with a focus on horror from movies to video games. So stay tuned, and stay green, survivors.